Yo, dudes, Oren here. This morning, I'm kind of whispering because I just woke up. I don't want to wake my neighbors. I meant to do this last night, but during the Bears and the Vikings game, which, by the way, thank you, Bears, for winning that game. But I decided to go to sleep instead. But we're doing a one round all NFL teams mock draft. And interesting twist here with the PFF, the way I'm doing it. So I kind of took it upon myself to do a little bit of research with this. So as you can see here, I have um, the uh, the PFF grades of the teams like overall. So um, and then I just kind of did like the bottom five or bottom 10, try to figure that out for each several of these categories here. So, and then I took notes of that, and then I kind of made my draft picks largely based on like a lot of that stuff. So, if, for example, like the New York Giants were bottom five in pass blocking, then I'll usually refer to them as they desperately need like a pass blocking offensive lineman, or if they just like need a team needs a category, then I'll just say they're typically like 6 to 10, bottom 6 to 10 in like one of these graded categories, and that's kind of how I did it. And then um, pass here, that's I guess passing in general, and then I just prioritize like QB or wide receiver for that, and then PBLK, that's pass blocking. So I'd look for an offensive lineman with a high passing blocking grade, and then that's definitely like wide receiver, and then run. I thought of like running back. This is just for this particular exercise. I know, like, just because, for instance, maybe there's a coverage. It won't necessarily be a cornerback, but it could also be a safety or a linebacker too. But in my opinion, like these particular positions associate with a certain grade. So you'll kind of see what I mean. So RBLK, that's run blocking. So I'd look for an offensive lineman with a high run blocking grade. RDEF, run defense, and I just tend to think of a defensive lineman. And linebacker could be there too, but in this case, I went with the defensive lineman. Then tack, which is just basically tackling in general. And I figured the linebackers and the safeties were the ones that you got to focus on the most with the tackling and bringing them down. And then PRSH, edge, they could definitely help with run block too, but um, and then defensive lineman could also help out with that, and along with other positions. But I think pass rush is mostly associated with the edge rusher, and then cov. I put cornerback there, and like I said, safety or linebacker could be there too. But I feel like cornerbacker, that'd be like the main job with that. So, and then yeah, without further ado, let's do this mock draft that I have. I'll show you guys what I did with it. So, and then with my first pick, I had the Bears pick. When I did this, I noticed that the Bears, they desperately need edge according to like the research I found from that, and then they also need a quarterback, a wide receiver, an offensive lineman who can run block, and a cornerback. But uh, desperately need. Remember, bottom five in the category, so they were bottom five in the pass rushing category when I looked at these grades as of um, last night. So for them I went with Latu, if that's how you say his name, edge rusher for the UCLA. He looked like the highest ranking edge rusher there. He had a really good pass rushing grade too. So I went with that for that pick. And the second overall pick, it was the Arizona Cardinals. They desperately needed a quarterback slash wide receiver, which means like the pass category, which you can see right here. I think that's associated with like both of those. And they also desperately needed offensive linemen who can run block, but then they also needed an offensive lineman who can pass block, uh, a defensive lineman, edge rusher, and cornerback. And the Cardinals yeah, they need a lot of things. And in this instance, because the Cardinals had Kyler Murray already, and at this point I just assume they're going to hang on to him. And I know that those high draft picks, you typically want to draft a quarterback. You go for value and all that. But again, this mock draft is just going with what the data is telling me, so to speak. So either quarterback, wide receiver, or offensive lineman was what I was looking at, and I decided to go of those three. I went with the best player, which was Marvin Harrison Jr. for the Cardinals. So maybe Kyler Murray could benefit from having him there. Time will tell. And then number three, that's the. Oh wow, I barely recognize the. Oh, that's because I was looking at this logo instead of the Patriots logo. But according to my data, they desperately need an edge rusher, desperately need a cornerback. They also could use a quarterback or wide receiver or offensive lineman. So I looked at edge rusher and cornerback, and I went with Chop Robinson for them, edge rusher from Penn State, one of the good names on the draft, and good pass rushing for that spot. So number four, we're back to the Bears again, and same things as before. They desperately needed edge based on my data, but we already got that. So quarterback, wide receiver, offensive lineman who can run block as well as cornerback. And then for this one, for them, I went with Talies Fuaga, a tackle from Oregon State. And I decided to kind of prioritize offensive linemen for them, since they need one that can run block and pass block. And this was the person I settled with, who seemed like they had the consistent PFF grades in both of those categories there. So number five, Washington Commanders. They actually did not finish in the bottom five or bottom 10 in any of the categories. These categories I was mentioning. So I kind of was. So it was difficult to be able to get them somebody based on my data, but I do remember that last I checked, Sam Howell was leading the league in getting sacked. So I figured I should prioritize offensive linemen for them to help protect Sam Howell. So I went with the next best one available, Joe Alt, tackle. And yeah. Number six, the New York Giants. They also need a lot of help right now. According to my data, they desperately need an offensive lineman who can pass block, desperately need a wide receiver, desperately need a running back, desperately need an offensive lineman who can run block, and then they also need a defensive lineman and a defender who can tackle. And I prioritized the offensive lineman position to help with the run blocking and pass blocking, and I went with I'm going to shorten his first name, Olu Fashanu, tackle out of Penn State. And then yeah, let's I think there was a game where Daniel Jones got sacked a bunch of times when he was playing. So everything starts with the offensive line when you're trying to help rebuild an offense and that sort of thing. So so you might just see a run of offensive linemen here. Number seven, Tampa Bay Bucks. When I did my data, they desperately need a cornerback. They need a running back. They need an offensive lineman who can run back, and a defensive lineman. And so I prioritized cornerback because they were in the bottom five in coverage, and I went with the one with the best coverage grade, the best available one, Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback from Alabama. Another fun name to say. And then number eight, for the New York Jets, they also have a lot of needs, especially on offense. So based on my data, they desperately need an offensive lineman who can pass block, a wide receiver they desperately need a running back. Again, based on like they're in the bottom five in those categories. So then they also need a quarterback, wide receiver. I already said that. and then also an offensive lineman who can run block. And I went with another offensive lineman for them to kind of help with that stuff. So JC Lantern, tackle out of Alabama, the next best one. So consistent with the pass rush, consistent with the run blocking and the pass blocking there. And then number 9 for the Chargers. And I know like the quarterback from North Carolina as well as Caleb Williams, they should go like 1 and 2 in some way. But again, this is the one I'm doing based off of, what the data is telling me and high position and need based on like PFF stuff. So anyways, the Chargers. When I did this, apparently they desperately need a running back. They desperately need an offensive lineman who can run block, and they also need a cornerback. So again, I prioritized offensive linemen there because I know the Chargers have Austin Eckler. And, when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert, you got to protect him as much as possible. I know the Chargers have drafted offensive linemen in recent years, such as, I think his name is Spencer Rattler. No. That's a quarterback in college. Anyways, so here I went with Amarius Mims, tackle for Georgia, to kind of go with that there. So the trend of offensive tackles going continues. Number 10, Tennessee Titans. They don't have any desperate needs, but they do have a need at defensive line, a need at edge rusher, and a need at cornerback. And with this one, I think I just went with the best available player of those 3 positions that based on like what was up there next with PFF. And then I went with cornerback Nate Wiggins, which is cornerback from Clemson. So I'll probably learn more about these names come April. I'll probably know these guys really well by then, but still though, I'm kind of, dipping my feet in the water with these guys because I'm focusing on the NFL season right now. Plus, the Matthew Stafford's trade is done with the Lions, so it's like, how much more fun can you have trying to figure out what Brad Holmes is going to do in the draft? Anyways, Las Vegas Raiders. They desperately need a running back, and they also need a quarterback / wide receiver. While the Raiders, they already have Josh Jacobs at running back. So, and they also have Davante Adams at wide receiver right now. So I figured this is one of the few times where I subjectively went against the data and, realized, okay, the Raiders need a quarterback. So I went ahead and got them Caleb Williams here at number 11, just outside the top 10. And then number 12, the New Orleans Saints. They don't have any desperate leads, but they do have a need for offensive linemen who can pass block. So that's what I prioritize for them, the best available pass blocking offensive lineman with that grade. And I went with Patrick Paul, tackle out of Houston for the Saints. And then number 13, Green Bay, again, like the Saints, they don't have any desperate needs, but they do have one need, an offensive lineman who can run block. And this time, instead of going with a tackle, I was able to go with a center for the Packers. I have no idea if they already have a center that they like, but I went with one of the top ones who can run block, and that's Jackson Powers / Johnson, the center from Oregon. Number 14, the LA Rams. Hey, the Rams have a first-round draft pick after the Matthew Stafford trade to the Lions. Now they're free. And what do they do with this? They desperately need a defensive player who can tackle, so that'd be like linebacker or safety. And they also need an offensive lineman who can pass block. So when I looked at the PFF players and their grades or whatever, I went with what was based on what was available there. I just went with whoever had like the lowest missed tackling rate, and like if you're around like 10% on there as opposed to like 13 or 15 or 22%, then 10% was what I went with, like based on who the highest graded linebacker or safety was. And in this case, it seemed to be Tyler Nubbin, safety from Minnesota. So You guys gotta have people who can tackle, apparently. Um, and then number 15, the Cincinnati Bengals. They desperately need a defensive lineman, I guess, because they're um, struggling to stop the run, apparently, based on these grades. They also desperately need a cornerback because they're not doing so well in coverage. And they also need an offensive lineman who can pass block, and they need somebody who can tackle on defense. So with this one, I looked at cornerbacks and defensive linemen, and the best player I found in both those categories apparently was Zerhan Newton, defensive lineman from Illinois. So, yeah. And then number 16 is the Buffalo Bills. And they only have one need, and it's a desperate need for somebody who can tackle. And then linebacker or safety mix. I went with the next highest or lowest tackle rate or whatever that I saw. And I went with Rod Moore, safety from Michigan. And I figured, the Bengals have a habit of drafting Michigan players. So here's another one for them. Time to switch over to the other side. And then number 17, Arizona Cardinals. They get to pick again in this draft. And like I said, they had a desperate need for quarterback and wide receiver, but we already got them Marvin Harrison Jr. They also have a desperate need for an offensive lineman who can run block. And then they have needs for an offensive lineman who can pass block, defensive lineman, and edge rusher and cornerback. So this time I prioritized the line for them. So, yep, another offensive lineman, another tackle. And I went with Jordan Morgan, the next best available lineman on them, tackle for Arizona. Arizona going to Arizona. How do you like that? And then number 18, Denver Broncos. Based on the data, they desperately need a defensive lineman. They desperately need somebody who can tackle. They desperately need a cornerback, and they also need a wide receiver and an edge rusher. So, and this one, I figured, a linebacker could probably cover all three of the desperate needs. They can cover, and then they can definitely tackle well, and then they could probably help stop with the run game, help neutralize the run game, and linebacker could probably do all three of those things in that specific case. So, the one of the top available ones, I went with Ed Garin Cooper, linebacker from Texas A&M, and yeah, hopefully I can help them stop from getting 70 points scored on them by the Dolphins. And then number 19, Atlanta Falcons. They desperately need a wide receiver / a quarterback because they were in the bottom 5 with the pass category, and then desperately need an edge rusher, and then they also need a running back. So it's not looking like Desmond Ridder is an elite quarterback. I think that's fair to say. So this is where I went with the North Carolina quarterback and got them for the Falcons. That because Atlanta, they have players like Drake London, and they should be improving as wide receivers, but we'll see there. But the quarterback, I think, can help them significantly with what they're doing, even though they're currently first in their division. Number 20, the Indianapolis Colts. They have a desperate need for wide receiver / quarterback, a desperate need for running back, and then also a need for, I already said wide receiver, and then a need for a defensive lineman, and then a defender who can tackle. So you never hear too much about wide receivers with the Colts anymore, and they already have Anthony Richardson, who is already he was injured for the season, but will be back next season. But let's give him a wide receiver weapon. So Malik Neighbors, wide receiver, LSU, who I went with. So number 21, the Minnesota Vikings. Apparently, they desperately need an edge rusher, even though they have Hunter, who's one of the league leaders in sacks. But they also need a running back. So for them, I got them an edge rusher who had the higher pass rush score at the time, and that was Dallas Turner, edge rusher from Alabama. Edge rushers are starting to go, kind of. Number 22, the Seattle Seahawks. They don't have any desperate needs, but they do have one need for a defensive player who can tackle. So linebacker and safety position for them. And I went with Danny Studsman, linebacker from Oklahoma. So I believe he had one of the lowest tackling missed tackle rates from the remaining available players. So yeah. And then number 23, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Apparently, they desperately need an offensive lineman who can pass block, and they desperately need a wide receiver, and they also need a wide receiver / quarterback. So a lot of offensive needs, but I highly suspect it had something to do with the offensive coordinator that they just fired, Matt Canada. So probably won't have to say his name ever again because I'm sick of hearing about the Steelers and how it's about Matt Canada, but he's gone now. So anyways, I took those two positions into account for Pittsburgh, and that is offensive lineman and wide receiver, and I chose the highest graded one available, which was Rome Oduzun, a wide receiver from Washington. Get George Pickens a buddy to run around the field with. And then number 24, the Houston Texans. They always seem like they're at the center of trades in the first round, the last few drafts. So apparently according to this, they desperately need a defensive lineman. They desperately need defenders who can tackle, and they also need an edge rusher. So I figured I went with a defensive line on this one because if you have a good defensive lineman, then that can make life easier for your linebackers and other positions behind them to be able to help clean up stuff. So for them, I got them. Besides, they already drafted Will Anderson last year, so that should help them. But apparently the best available one that I went with was Chris Jenkins, defensive lineman out of Michigan for them. Number 25, the Miami Dolphins. I guess they're done with their punishment and trying to get Tom Brady or whatever, and they have a first-round draft pick. And apparently they don't have any desperate needs, but they do have a need for an offensive lineman who can run block. And for that, I went with Christian Hayes, a guard out of Connecticut. It seemed like he had the highest run blocking grade out of anybody, so I went with him there. I think there was better offensive linemen there from bigger schools, but the data is the data. And then the number 26, the Dallas Cowboys. This is another situation where the team really doesn't have any needs because they don't have any grades that are in the bottom 10 or below. So, and I just kind of took a shot in the dark in this one and figured, maybe running back could be what they're looking for. And I went with the best, highest graded running back who also was from Texas. So it's a Texas thing going to the Dallas thing, and it's all Texas there. This player I don't think is as good as Bijan Robinson, but best running back in this draft, apparently, Jonathan Brooks, the halfback from Texas. And yeah. And then number 27, here we are, my team, the Detroit Lions. Based on the data, they don't have any desperate needs, but they do have a need for cornerback, and I couldn't agree more with that. They definitely need help with covering the wide receivers in the NFC North and try to get as good help with that as possible. And I feel like other teams know this, and they're always trying to take the cornerbacks that the Lions have their eyes on in the draft. So it's harder than what you would think for Brad Holmes to try to get the cornerback you want. So anyways, and I went with there was another one from Iowa that I almost got, but then I looked at this Terrion Arnold cornerback from Alabama, his stats, and even though he was ranked lower, his overall grades for everything looked more impressive. So I went with him there. Plus, Brad Holmes says he has a lot of respect for Nick Saban, and he's drafted a fair amount of Alabama players from there. So why stop now? Number 28, Jacksonville Jaguars. They have a desperate need for offensive linemen who can run back, a desperate need for edge rusher, even though they drafted that guy first overall a couple of years ago. And then they also have a need for wide receiver. So the best available from the desperate needs ones was edge rusher Braden Trice, edge rusher from Washington. So that's who I gave them there. Number 29, the Kansas City Chiefs. Apparently, they have a desperate need for a defensive lineman and then also a need for edge rusher. And they drafted George Karlaftis recently. So, and then I guess Chris Jones is about to become a free agent. So, I got them a defensive lineman, Devondre Sweat from Texas. Number 30, the San Francisco 49ers. You don't see them too often in the first round anymore, but apparently they have a desperate need for an offensive lineman who can pass rush. So I went with the highest graded one I could find there, Troy Fautanu, a tackle from Washington. Number 31, the Baltimore Ravens. They don't have any needs anywhere, just like the Dallas Cowboys. And this one was a very tricky one. And this one I actually had to go through like each of the remaining high ranked players and then see what if Baltimore was a popular pick for any of those players. And it took a while, but the first one I saw at like 9%, like third place in that one for Baltimore. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State. So yeah, I guess you prioritized wide receiver last offseason, so why stop now, especially when it's the reason why you're being so successful. And then number 32, the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a need at running back. And, DeAndre Swift is, for the most part, a rental for them. So who knows if he'll come back, because this is his fourth year in the NFL. So but yeah, I went with a running back for them. One of the next highest graded one for all those running back stats, Trey Benson, running back from Florida State. So yeah. That's my mock draft for the for this time around. We're 2/3 of the way through the season officially, and teams are probably starting to figure out like what their biggest weaknesses are, and this probably helps them give an idea on that. And then a lot of this is probably what I would not do for a first round of mock draft, but it kind of helps show people like what their biggest weaknesses are, what they desperately need, and then what they need. And it looks like a lot of alignment is what a lot of people need right now, based on the PFF grades. So hopefully you guys all understand the context of how I did this draft and you guys kind of get it. But until next time, go Lions, one pride.